Connor, I remember reading that your middle name is actually John. Are you John Connor, the promised leader of the resistance, protector of humanity, fighter of the machines? And how is this not your brand, your username? Did you fire your marketing guy?
So it's actually funnier than this. So my mother is German. So my middle name is actually not John, it's Johannes, which is the German equivalent of John. So it's kind of like I'm like one step like kabbalistically removed, so to speak. So it's a funny brand. When people find that out, it's always a good laugh.
It is definitely meaningful in many ways. Anyone who saw the Terminator series expects a lot from you. But you started, like many of us, working on capabilities research. I think you were trying to open source GPT-2, maybe GPT-3. How did you flip from the dark side to safety team?
So I actually flipped to the light side, dark side, depending on how you want to see it. Even before then, so it's a bit of a more nuanced story than that. So really, when I first got involved with AI, I was like 16 or something. So this is like a long time ago, and I was a teenager. I was pretty stupid. So my capabilities work was truly nothing of a threat to the world. Let's say this is before even like this is before Transformers. This is kind of like 2000 like 11 maybe. So like really early, like even neural networks, like not really that big of a thing. Um, and then I did get, it was pretty obvious to me pretty quickly that, if you could build something that's this powerful, which I was hoping for, right? Like something that can cure cancer, that can solve all the problems, make the world a better place. That's a very dangerous thing. And like, how do you even control something like that? We don't even know. So I was already interested in the problem of control at the time when I started working on open source. The reason I worked on open source basically was that I grew up a hacker, self-taught hacker kind of guy, open source world, IRC world, just really kind of that kind of. I was really steeped in this culture, and one of the things of this culture is this kind of belief that in the open source community, the hive mind, the larger world of hackers and safety enthusiasts, as the best way to make software safe is to understand it. It's not to hide it. It's to make it open. It's to make it accessible so people across the world can pool all of their great talents and interests and so on in order to make software better and safer. This is kind of the thing that I was very steeped into this culture at the time. So at the time, really what I believed was that AGI was definitely going to come, but it's still decades away. Maybe 2040, 2050, this might start becoming a problem. But until then, I have a ton of time. I have a ton of time to do a lot of research. Build a lot of career capital, have a family. Do all that kind of stuff, and then so I'll be I'll be ready in 2040 when it becomes an issue. And that all flipped in 2019 when GPT-2 first came out. When I saw GPT-2, for me it was this oh shit moment. It's happening now. It's happening much faster than I thought. I didn't think we'd see something like GPT until 2030s, 2040s. And then when I saw that, I basically had to just throw over all of my plans and be like, all right, shit, I just need to understand this right now. And the best way I need to do that at the time is to build it, to build my own, to understand it, and to, hopefully tap into, the wider community of, hackers, security researchers, etc. And that's not what happened. I became very burnt on the open source movement, where for me it was obvious is that we need to build these things, before they're dangerous. Like GPT-2 is not going to end the world, and then we need to understand them very, very deeply. We need to take them apart. We need to, actually make them safe before we can, even consider working on something more dangerous. And that's truly just not what happened. No one gave a shit. Everyone just wanted things faster, bigger, open source, uncensored, who cares about the consequences or who cares who gets hurt? That's not my problem. And so I became very burnt on this ideology that I grew up in as a kid. As a teenager, it's libertarianism is very appealing. It's kind of like baby's first politics. But as you grow up, you just realize that this is a very just not a realistic way to run the society. It's just very childish and not commensurate to the kinds of issues that we have to face here. And so I moved away from the open source movement as a result of this, and continued to do a lot of work on the technical side of things, then in more of a private setting, my own company, and then eventually now moved away from that as well towards more political work, because I think that's the most pressing and the most important thing to be working on right now.
So, a few questions to follow up. Do you think there is any specific reason, argument you see for why people like you, maybe I, discover this kind of internally and switch, and others, even after being told and debated, still resist this pretty obvious conclusion?
I think there's no answer to this question that doesn't, shade into psychoanalysis, basically. I don't think it's a technical thing. I think it's purely an emotional thing. There's a thing whereas most nerds, most tech people get into tech because they like tech, because they like computers, because they like math, because whatever. This is not really why I got into it. I got into it because I like people and I wanted the world to be a better place. And this seems like the best way I could make the world better for people. And I could, help people live better lives and solve problems that the world is facing. I also like technology, sure, but it never was my core motivation. Like, if, in a sense, for me, it was just like, if this is not the thing that will help the most people, then okay, I'll just go do something else. That's all right. And I think this is a very hard pill to swallow for many people, because I think many people don't really care that much. Like, that's not their main motivation, like their spiritual motivation. I'm not saying not some motivation there, but like fundamentally, I want people to be okay. I want the world to be better. And I take this very, very seriously. And this often means reckoning or like wrangling with, problems that aren't technical in nature but are like emotional or even spiritual in nature, in a sense, where like you have to just, like, for example, confront that maybe you were wrong and maybe you've done things that were bad. I think I've done things that are morally bad. Like, I think I probably shouldn't have done as much open source work as I did. I think it was very reasonable at the time, given the information I had and the context I was in. I think it was a very reasonable thing to do, but that doesn't mean it was good. You know what I mean? And so sometimes just you have to be able to say, oh yeah, I was wrong. Or, I maybe shouldn't have done that. Or like, and other people shouldn't do it either. And that's just it's more of an emotional bottleneck to admit that, like, maybe technology isn't a good thing, and maybe it actually is a double-edged sword. And maybe, maybe those extremely annoying liberal arts people had a point about some of the things they say, and sometimes, and yeah, there's nuance here. There's tribalism. There's a lot of tribalism among nerds and tech people. And of course, there's the obvious, Upton Sinclair thing of just like, it's very hard to make a man understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Like, I think people just truly do not appreciate how true this is, even of themselves. Like, how much you can trick yourself into just like, it's kind of reasonable. It's not so bad, is it? So yeah, I think all these factors matter a lot. I think culture matters a lot. If all your friends are tech people, if your employer is tech people, if your spouse works in tech, and so on, just kind of like reckoning with this idea that like maybe we're the bad guys. It's just like actually really hard to do. And if you're very smart, you're very good at coming up with excuses. So you can always come up with some excuse about why actually it's okay. Actually, it's fine. Don't worry about it. So as I say, it shades a lot of psychoanalysis here. I think the cynical take is just like, it's where their check and their ego comes from, and getting over people's money and ego is just like pretty hard.
Stock options, not even salary, just stock options.
True.
You switched to safety. Do you feel you made important contributions in technical safety, or is you leaving safety now for governance, for lobbying, an indicator that it is kind of dead end when it comes to advanced AI?
I did a lot of work that I'm very proud of that helped me a lot in my thinking of how these things work and like how hard this problem is. But fundamentally, I don't think I advanced the field by any significant amount. For the matter of fact, I don't think basically almost anyone has in the last years. Um, you know, Sorry to all the people working on this field, but we have made almost zero progress on the idea, on the actual hard problems. Sure, we have a bunch of papers about like some statistical distributions of sparse autoencoders or some shit, but like this is just completely irrelevant to the actual kind of problems we need to solve. Um, I think I have deconfused myself a lot in terms of like why this problem is hard and like why the things that we're currently trying don't even have a chance of working even in theory. I think this is very valuable, at least to me. But fundamentally, I think the idea that we could solve safety of superintelligence is just ridiculous. Like it's so Like to me, like it's like such a it's like a Marvel comics kind of thing. It's like something you see in like a silly movie, right? Like this is not how real world things work at all. It's kind of like saying we're gonna build a world government that can solve all problems of industry, of morality, of psychology, of politics, of game theory, of physics, of biology. Also, all of these problems in one go using software, and there will be no bugs. And like, I'm sorry, if this is the spec of your project, this isn't a serious proposal. This is not a serious project. This is not how you actually like. You cannot. This can't be done. You cannot build a system like this. It cannot be done in any sensible way. And if you believe that you can execute on a spec like this, like I'm sorry, you're delusional. Like it's just not doable. And this is what it would mean to build an aligned superintelligence. Building a superintelligence that like does what you want would solve all of these problems. And if you think you have a spec that can do this, like I'm sorry, you don't. Like this is a problem that I'm open to the idea of if all of our greatest scientists with trillions of dollars of budgets worked on this problems for 3 generations. I'm open to it, like maybe, right? But like anything less than that, I'm sorry, it's not possible.
So you're saying theoretically the problem is solvable, just very hard. In practice, we don't have time, brains, resources to do it in a time frame. If you think even theoretically it is possible, can you give me an idea, kind of the pseudocode level description of what that means to align or control superintelligence, what that world looks like?
It's very hard to imagine, and I think a lot of good epistemology is not thinking about things that break your epistemology. Like a lot of the reason people are bad at this is because it involves thinking about things that we're very confused about, such as morality. You cannot address a question of like governance or morality or like so on or a triage without thinking about moral philosophy to some degree. And humanity as a whole is extremely confused about morality. It's not just we haven't solved it, like we don't even know what it means to make progress on this. Like we can't even agree on like the basic epistemological foundations of how do we make progress on this problem. And um, questions of like alignment and superintelligence are not questions about computer science. There are questions involved about computer science, but many of the questions are much closer to governance. They're much closer to how do you design a state? How do you design a large entity, under game theoretic considerations that gives, that can, function under, complex moral dilemmas where often there is no solution. Like often if you're a government, you're doing triage, right? There's only so much money to go around. There are infinite good projects you could work on. How do you triage? How do you triage? How do you handle, war? How do you handle law enforcement? How do you handle, like, there's just like many, many things. The world is actually very complex. Like this is a thing that, um, as a kid, you'd always try to be resistant to is like, yeah, the old people say everything is complicated, but I got to figure out. But no, like the world, in fact, has many parts, not infinitely, like there are, but like it is actually a lot. If you build a superintelligence that is aligned, this is a system that is so powerful that it would fix everything, hypothetically, that it could, and it would do so in a way that we would endorse. And the thing is, we're too confused to even consent to this. Like, there's a thing where like the reason consent varies by like people's mental ability and like maturity and so on is because just like there are things that are too confusing, for example, for a child to consent to, whether that's drugs or surgeries or sex or whatever. Like they're just like things that are dangerous, and like a child can't understand this, and so obviously we have to shield them from engaging in such activities. And there's a similar thing here that also applies to adult humans, where like the idea that we could like consent to something reshaping all of the world and solving all of moral philosophy, like we can't consent to this. Like we're too immature. Our understanding as a society of what this would look like and like what this would mean is so immature that like we couldn't know, we couldn't understand it. So the way it would really look in practice, right, is if you actually made progress on the actual alignment problem, you would on the way there figure out how to build much more just institutions. You would figure out how to bake much more capable governments that are much more fair and much less corrupt. You would figure out how to solve large scale disagreements among humans. You would like better debate platforms or something like this. You would solve political polarization. You would get really good at handling memetic outbreaks, for example. Like you would be really good at knowing how do you prevent like dangerous or like false parasitic ideas from like affecting people at scale, because you need to solve all these problems in order to build a system this powerful. You would also solve cybersecurity. You would learn a lot about how to build complex systems operating in adversarial environments in ways that they don't break. You would have to make massive progress on like formally verified programming. You would have to make massive progress on modeling social systems, psychological systems, economic systems, etc. You would have to make massive progress on, unsolved theoretical problems of like how embedded agents in the environment think about their own mind. Like you would have to make progress on so many different problems. Like there's just like you would have to solve like, you know, most of science kind of to get to something that we would actually have a justified belief in trusting. I think you can definitely grow something in a digital petri dish that is this powerful. But if you want to have confidence that you know what you're doing and that it is actually as possible, like this is the hardest scientific problem humanity has ever faced. I don't think it's necessarily impossible, at least, up to some bound. I'm not saying 100% is definitely possible because, the world is chaotic, but like getting it to a bound that we might be able to consent to, I could imagine it, but like it would take generations.
Can you translate your beliefs about difficulty or impossibility of that problem into PDOOM estimates, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years out?
The way I generally think of this is that there's like, PDOOM if we don't do anything, and this PDOOM if we do something. I think if we don't do something, it's, very close to 100%, maybe 90% or 95 or something, just to account for uncertainty. But like the way I think I can understand, there's no way this goes well. Like there's just no realistic world where just like we build the first things we can as quickly as possible with zero oversight, zero thinking, zero planning, zero risk management, and just pump it all out as fast as possible. This cannot go well. Like unless there's like some crazy facts about reality, maybe aliens come from outer space and fix it for us. But like, like I'm sorry, like this is just not. Again, this for me, this is like Marvel, like comic book nonsense. Like the idea that this could go well for me is just like very childish. If we do something, I think it's very different. I think it's absolutely possible for humans to solve like public goods problems like these. I think it is possible for, say, governments to say the current level of risk that is being externalized onto the general public is unacceptable, and we need to step in. We need to like not build things that we think are this dangerous until we're ready for it. And I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but this is a thing that can be done. And we do have institutions that have the power to do it. This is not always the case, right? Like many times in history, there were no entities like governments that were powerful enough to be able to regulate things like this, but they do exist. They're dysfunctional in various ways, but they do exist and it can work. And I think if we take it seriously, and we slow down the development, we don't develop these super dangerous things, or we only do it like in a very, very high security context, and we do this internationally, I think we could do it. Like I think it's possible. I think it'll be very messy. There's no way the 21st century isn't messy, but like that would if we get a global ban on superintelligence, that puts my PDOOM down like a lot. I don't even know how much, but like a lot.
Why do you think AI safety community as a whole is a lot more optimistic? They really feel they can actually find a technical solution in many cases.
Because their salary depends on them believing that.
That is the only reason. There is no scientific, technical reason to be optimistic from what you've seen.
Like there's this thing where like scientific sounds objective, but it's only objective in a paradigmatic field. If you're in a pre-paradigmatic field, like obviously you can generate a scientific looking paper that confirms whatever they believe. That's the problem. Is that like it's the same problem we have saying like psychology. Like I can come up with basically any theory of psychology, and I can generate a scientifically, p equals 0.05, whatever, paper that justifies whatever I was saying. The epistemology of science is actually harder than this, and because we have such horrible understanding of what's actually going on here, and it is actually very subtle, anyone can basically justify anything they want with a sufficiently complicated argument. And the correct step to do here is not to be like, well, I have more papers than your paper or something. It's just to be like, take a step back. Obviously, we can't agree here, so we should be careful. The only thing all experts can agree on is that there's a chance that this goes terribly, terribly catastrophically wrong. And the only thing we can all agree upon is that not building superintelligence would prevent the risk. That's the only thing we can agree upon, And then the correct decision theory here is to step back and be like, whatever the truth of the matter is, we don't know what the truth of the matter is. We're not close to having resolve these conflicts, and therefore we should take the cautionary approach because the risks are so high. So it's really more of a strategic thing here, where it's like, it doesn't matter what they publish. Like, their technical arguments, like, people will tell me, okay, Connor, but have you seen the latest paper that proves? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to read it. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
So I can completely agree with you. I've been kind of preaching the same story for a while, but the next logical attempt is to do something with governance, with lobbying. I think that's what you are doing with your organization. Can you tell me about the organization and what you're doing in DC with it?
Yeah, so I am now the US Executive Director of ControlAI. So it's a nonprofit organization with presence here in DC, the UK, Canada, and Germany. It's been around for a couple of years. I've been on and off involved as an advisor, and now I'm here full time. Really, what has pushed me to do this now full time here and have now moved to Washington, DC, is this realization, is understanding that there is no technical solution here, and that this is fundamentally a political problem. The problem we're solving is that we need to solve is a political problem. The question isn't, as we've been talking about, like, do we use this technique or that technique to make our AI safe, whatever the hell that means. It's much more, who gets to make these choices? Who gets to decide what level of risk the public is exposed to if we are unsure? If we don't know whether a nuclear reactor will or will not melt down, who decides whether we build the nuclear reactor? And in every other industry and every other risky industry, whether that's the weapons industry or nuclear or whatever, even just like normal industrial processes or even restaurants, this is decided by the government. This is the government has the mandate, the mandate to protect and set the limits of what level of risk the public is exposed to from various types of industries and activities. It is illegal to attempt to build a bomb, like in your garage. Even if you fail, even if the bomb doesn't go off, it's still illegal to try. It's still illegal to do that because you are putting other people at risk by doing this activity. Now, we do have factories that make bombs. That is definitely a thing. And the government decides how safe those factories have to be, who gets to build them, how it works, etc. And for some reason, well, we can talk about the reasons. This is just not the case in AI. Currently, there is more regulation on selling a sandwich to the general public than there is on building super intelligent AI that could kill literally everyone on Earth. And these companies are lobbying extremely hard to keep it that way. They have assembled the largest lobbying force in history, like some of the largest political donations, super PACs, etc., ever, in order to keep it this way, so that they can race for super intelligence unhindered. And this is not the will of the people. This is not what I or the general public here in America or abroad want. And so I'm here together with ControlAI and others to help the government understand these problems, realize what's happening and what can be done about it, and to catalyze the action necessary to get us to a true international ban on the development of superintelligence anywhere. Because fundamentally, this is a grave national security risk. Whether it's a domestic U.S. company building a recklessly dangerous system that harms citizens, or it's a geopolitical rival such as China building such systems, it doesn't really matter. If a superintelligence, uncontrolled, is built by anyone anywhere on Earth, this is an unacceptably high level of risk to the American people and everyone on Earth. And so the government must act.
I want to set up a few thought experiments. So the first question would be, are you a U.S. citizen?
Yes.
So that helps a lot. So let's say tomorrow you wake up in the body of the President of the United States. You have complete executive power, any executive orders you want. What is it you actually writing? What are you signing?
So there's a couple things. One of the first things is that I would get on national TV immediately and say it is now the priority of the American state to make sure that superintelligence is not built by anyone. Go live on TV, and then I'd send a memo to all the heads of all the different departments. Department of War, Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, and I tell them all, make me a plan right now how we prevent anyone on Earth from building superintelligence and like get it to me by next week. I want it on my desk. That would be what I would do. So I get the CIA, I get the NSA, I get the military, I get everyone. You're making doctrines now of how do we prevent both domestic actors, international rivals, and rogue actors from building superintelligence. You figure that out right the hell now and get it on my desk by next week. That would be the first thing I would do.
Do you think they would have to nationalize our labs, at least?
I think there are many ways to skin a cat. I think there are many ways to approach problems like this. I think nationalization is one instrument, but there are others as well. There are a lot of things of how we, for example, regulate weapons manufacturers. So a lot like Lockheed Martin, for example, the classic Area 51, is a highly secure facility that does not leak information, except the occasional UFO, and is the kind of level of security that you might want when building systems like this. And it's mostly run by Lockheed Martin, which is a private company. So we do actually have a lot of experience with regulating companies to the degree that we can trust them to have like very high info security, that they are building what the United States actually needs and not some other thing, that they're not leaking these capabilities to our adversaries, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of framework we can already build on. Nationalization might be necessary, but I think this is a very much like a technical detail that doesn't really matter for the overall thing. Fundamentally, what we need is not a specific piece of legislation. What we need is a sufficiently large coalition of powerful people, such as the president, but also the general public, the heads of various agencies and so on, to want ASI to not exist. And then use their capabilities to figure out the best tools at their disposal to achieve this objective. Fundamentally, the policy objective must be that superintelligence never exists, or at least not until we're ready. And then we have to consider that we will need a many-pronged approach. Because, of course, these companies, rogue actors, criminal elements, rogue states such as Iran and North Korea will attempt to acquire these capabilities. And so we will need a many-pronged approach to be able to, how can we prevent these kind of things? How can we create a trust but verify regime with countries such as China, where we ultimately need an international agreement of some sort that all of us do not pursue such capabilities, do not build superintelligence. But we should trust, but we should also verify. It's very important that we also have the technical verification methods so that, say the Chinese state can prove to us that they are not building superintelligence and that we can prove to them that we are not building superintelligence. And all of this just requires truly many moving parts. I think this is a thing that is doable. And that's why I say, like, if I was the president, the first thing is I would take all of my, ministers and make clear that this is our priority and that they need to figure out how to make this happen.
If instead of being a government leader, you were in a position of Sam Altman or Elon Musk, how would your actions be different?
Very different. Fundamentally, I would immediately resign. That would be the first thing I would do, because you can't function in this role. Like, if your job is make superintelligence, you can't become the anti-superintelligence guy because you lose your job. Like, even Sam Altman or Elon can't really do that without crippling their own company. And so the first thing you would need to do is, quit your job. Then what I would do is, if I would say Sam Altman, is I would take my prodigious wealth, connections, charisma, intelligence, and make it my priority to make sure this happens. I call in all the favors I can with all government officials I know. I would start a media campaign. I would, maybe build an organization or donate a lot of money to organizations to make sure these kind of things happen. I would go on national TV and say, I was the CEO of these companies and this is what we need to do. And I call, upon the government to make these happen, et cetera. Yeah, those are the things that I would do. It's because, again, only the government has de jure kind of ability to even do what needs to be done here. Even if, say, Sam Altman wanted to pause or something, he can't. He doesn't have the capability to do this. And especially, he doesn't have the capability to enforce it. So even if Sam, Elon, Demis, all these people come together and they all make a pact, they all shake hands and like, yes, we will not build superintelligence and we're going to pause right now. Doesn't matter because A, they can't enforce it amongst each other. They don't have law enforcement capabilities. So if one of them defects, how will the others know? A, and B, how will they stop them? Like it's not illegal, so they can't send the police. What are they going to do? Nothing they can do. That's why we have law enforcement. That law enforcement can make you stop because it's illegal. And even if these companies stopped, will that make companies in China stop? Will that make other American companies stop? Will that make, Jan LeCun's new company in France stop or something? No, obviously not. And even if all of these companies stop, the next batch of startups is already going and like they will come into being and they will do it as long as it isn't, we don't have a both domestically and internationally enforced agreement that stops superintelligence and makes it illegal.
We've seen many employees of those companies, especially in the safety departments, quit, resign in protest, resign because they think they'd rather go write poetry for a year. Do you think it's the right decision, or is it better to stay and try to slow it down from inside?
For all these people, obviously you should quit. Let me be unambiguous here. If you work in an AI company, quit your job. You should quit it right now. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is fundamentally, if you're doing a bad thing, stop. Just like deontology, standard morality. If you find yourself working, at a death camp, stop. Like first thing, stop, drop, and roll. Just like stop making things worse. That's the very first thing you should do. Stop making things worse. The second thing is that this idea of like doing things from the inside has never worked. Like people absolutely suck at this. Look, if you are a brilliant CIA sociopath lizard man, and you want to like break the law by sabotaging internally, like maybe, but like hell nah. Like this is not how we do things in this world. Like this is not how we do things in the West. We don't, this is vigilante justice is what it is, and we don't do vigilantism. This is not how an orderly society works. So if your goal is to do vigilantism, I say no. This is not how we do things. It's just going to make things worse and it will not help. But really, most people, when they take jobs like this, it's just their conscience, and like they want to make a big amount of money and they want to hang out with cool people and talk about tech all day, and they want to be in the room because it makes them feel good. They're high status, it makes them feel famous. But this is a thing that these companies exploit very heavily. They're not stupid. They make you feel like, oh yeah, we're definitely listening to you. Wow, you're making such a difference. While they put you in a little terrarium where you're completely insulated from anything actually ever happening. And then if you ever actually do something, as many of these people have found out, suddenly it stops working. Like suddenly they hit all these barriers and then they quit. So basically, I think these people are, either willfully or non-willfully just being deluded. These companies are extremely optimized as an entity to prevent exactly this thing. Like, why would you think that going into the territory controlled by the thing you're trying to, prevent would somehow be the easiest way to act? And especially if these companies are like advertising to you, that obviously means that this is a trap. If you're playing chess and your opponent says, wow, that's such a great move, that's not good for you.
Governance should work really well for large projects, something you can monitor easily, Manhattan style, huge compute. But every year, compute becomes more efficient, algorithms become more efficient. How long before none of that matters? Anyone with a laptop can create superintelligence.
I don't know. I think if it's possible to build superintelligence on a laptop in the next couple of years, it's probably just game over. Like, I think it's just nothing we can do, basically. I think, yeah, this is a fact about computer science more so than anything. If it turns out that just like there is an algorithm just like runs on a MacBook and it just builds super intelligence in one go, and we discover it in the next, say, 10, 20, 30 years, then I think we're just screwed. And there's basically nothing we can do. It's just too, that is just too crazy. We would need to burn every single CPU on the planet. And this is just like not a thing that can be done. In that case, I would recommend retiring to a tropical island with your family and enjoying some good time off. I would be surprised if this algorithm existed or if we would discover it in the next 20, 30 years. It's not my main expectation, but I don't know. It's definitely possible. Um, I do expect it will remain a significant engineering problem, at least for the near future, but not for much longer. We are very close to AGI. We are very close to ASI. We are, and once we cross the event horizon of even a single ASI existing, it's too late. It can be copied. The techniques can be improved, etc. So I think if we were as a civilization 3 steps wiser than we were, we would have never done ChatGPT in the first place. If we were 2 steps wiser than we currently are, we would have done ChatGPT, immediately seen that it's like this crazy thing, they can do all this crazy stuff, got 1 million users overnight, and we would have been like, oh no, 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 shut it all down, and studied it very, very carefully for years before slowly rolling it out. If we were 1 step wiser than we currently are, we'd stop right now, because every step forward we take, it also makes turning back harder, exponentially more expensive. Um, if we get to the point where I think there will be a point that even if we stop now, algorithms continue to improve, where very dangerous AI systems can be built on very small amounts of compute, and the kinds of mechanisms needed to deal with this kind of stuff are the things that take decades to build, um, and we don't even know what those would look like yet, and so we need the time to be able to figure that out.
A lot of red lines proposed by AI safety community as long as decade ago have been crossed completely. The systems are lying, cheating, escaping, blackmailing. Are there any remaining red lines which you are particularly concerned about, which have not been crossed yet?
I mean, you can always come up with something, but I basically agree with you. It's like we have crossed so many red lines and we constantly do it. We now have systems such as Mythos, which are, more capable at hacking than an NSA strike team. This is like, it's hard to overstate how many red lines have already been crossed. And this is why I think a lot of this, thinking that oh, there'll be a warning shot. Oh, once a big thing happens, everyone will act. And I think this is just completely false. Empirically, we've crossed massive red lines like, the Turing test. You remember when everyone said, once a Turing test gets passed, then we know it's serious. No one even cared when it happened. Now we have systems, that are on par with the NSA when it comes to hacking and stuff like that, actual nation state level cyber weapons, systems that are as dangerous as, more dangerous in sense than missiles, and, we just keep going. So I think there are, some levels yes, AI it's not yet AGI, it can't yet recursively self-improve itself. It can't yet run fully autonomously 24/7 for years at a time. Yeah, but I think it's not many of them left.
If you look at kind of OGs of AI safety, Yudkowsky, Hugo de Garis, what mistakes do you think they made? They had a lot of early advantage. They started, 20 years ago. Is there some missed opportunities we can learn from? Likewise, in your career, do you feel you made a big mistake which could have made a difference?
I think the biggest mistake fundamentally is that the entire AI safety movement was built on a corrupt ideology of libertarianism and utilitarianism. And these are just the wrong morals. They're the wrong ideology. If you build a system on these, they cannot handle these types of problems. There's a reason that our governments and our civilizations are not built on these norms because they don't work. And they can't handle these types of large scale coordination problems. There's a really fascinating essay from Eliezer, I think from 99 or 98. He was very young when he wrote it, so I'm sure he disavows it. Let's not, harp on him too much. Eliezer is truly someone who has changed his mind and has updated a lot, and I have a lot of respect for him for this reason. But it's a really telling piece where he talks about superintelligence and how it will change everything, blah, blah, blah. And towards the end of the essay, he says, okay, so what should we do? And one of the things he says, in big bold letters, is importantly, so we don't tell the government and we don't tell the general public because they're stupid and they might panic and do something else. So we, the smart people, have to do it in secret. We have to do it right. And this is fundamentally built on this libertarian seed of ideology, where this like it's very funny. Like I was talking to some Japanese people. We had a little AI safety conference in Japan a couple years ago. I was talking to some Japanese people, and we're explaining the concept of like effective altruism, AI safety, MIRI, and this kind of stuff to them. And the idea of catastrophic risk made perfect sense to them. They're like, yep, that seems makes sense. That seems really bad. We definitely should do something about that. But there's one thing that was really confusing to them, and they're like, but why are there charities involved? Why are charities or private companies involved? This is something the government, the military should be handling. Why are there private charities funded by like some philanthropist handling threats of this level to entire nation states? That doesn't make any sense. Why aren't you going to the military? I think this is a really good question. And because these are the bodies that we have built to solve these types of problems. There's this thing, this mistake I think that was made very early on, where people phrase this problem of superintelligence as like a new type of problem. Like nothing in history is even close like this. And on some axes this is true, but I think it's vastly overplayed. This is a classic economics 101 public goods problem. It's very clear that markets are great. I like markets. They provide my food. They're good for many things. I think free market has done a lot of good in the world, but it's one tool in our tool belt. One of the big mistakes that a lot of people make, especially in America and especially the libertarian side of things, is that they think of markets as a solution to everything. But markets are one specific tool in our tool belt to solve a certain class of problems. And we know, since like the 60s, 70s, or even earlier than that, we know from standard economic theory which types of problems markets cannot solve. And the larger class of problems that markets we know cannot solve is public goods problems. The classic example is you have a river, it's unpolluted, and you have a chemical company, and you could put all your toxic sludge into the river, and that would make your product cheaper, but it would poison the river. Now, maybe you're a nice guy, and you don't put your sludge into the river. But the guy next door, maybe he's less nice of a guy, he puts the sludge into the river. Now his product is cheaper, he outperforms you, you go out of business. And now the river's polluted. And now sometimes people get a bit confused here and they think like, okay, but what if everyone is drinking from the water? Well, then surely they wouldn't do that. Well, okay, let's say the asshole, he finds out, oh, he's drinking from the water too. His kids are drinking from the water. So he stops doing it. Well, what happens? Well, then some guy comes around who's actually crazy and thinks, well, actually drinking poison is good for you. Actually, it's a liberal conspiracy that, drinking poison is bad for you. Actually, he starts a chemical company and now the asshole goes out of business. And now the crazy person is the one running the company. So the problem here is the market. It selects for price. If you select for price, you will select for someone crazy enough to pollute the river. The same way is that the current market is selecting for people crazy enough to think they can solve super intelligent alignment. It's the same mechanism. And so and we know the solution to this problem. The solution to this problem is regulation. This is exactly what governments are for. The only way to stop the chemical companies from having a race to the bottom is to have regulation that everyone cannot pollute the river or we will throw them in jail. This solves the problem. Once everyone has to compete on a same level playing field, fine. Have them compete on making the nicest plastic or whatever, but we're not letting them put the sludge in the river, right? That's fine. And this is how we handle every other product, every other form. Like there is no such thing as an unregulated market on anything. And this is the reason. This is a very, very standard textbook, undergrad economics, very standard thing. But for some reason, early on the AI safety movement, these people got into their head that this is like stupid or not needed or whatever. We can talk about why that is. I think it shades again into psychoanalysis. But fundamentally, they were trying to solve a coordination problem with the wrong tool. Private companies, charities, and so on are not the structure that can solve a problem like this, especially an international problem of this kind. This is what we have governments, militaries, regulations, etc. for. I'm not saying these systems are perfect by any sense. They're extremely flawed, but they are the right tool for the job, unlike these other systems which a priori cannot work. Like they're just the wrong tool.
So we mostly talk about and are concerned about with existential risks. Should we spend some time on suffering risks? Are they neglected? Are they important to address? Can they be used as a tool for personal self-interest to motivate people not to build superintelligence?
I'm very wary about stuff like this. So a lot of, again, as I said earlier, a lot of the things we're dealing with are very confusing. Morality is very confusing. Thinking about the far future is very confusing. Thinking about utilitarianism, suffering, simulations, consciousness, it's all very, very confusing. And so there's the way, one of the important things is when you're in a very confusing environment is to often not think about complex things because you will troll yourself. You will, if you're not grounded enough, you will just kind of make up whatever and just kind of drift off. So I think suffering risks are a very complex, very confusing thing. They're very far off and they're basically universally post singularity. They're post superintelligence in almost all cases. Um, and so I generally don't think about them much. And not in the sense that they like are impossible. Unfortunately, I do think they're possible. I think they're unlikely, but like I do think they are possible. But in the sense that they're not actionable. They're not actionable. They're very abstract. They're very hypothetical. They're very confusing to think of. I'm too confused to be able to solve this. But the only thing, again, we can all agree upon is if we don't build superintelligence, we don't have to worry about it. This is the one thing, the very, very simple thing that we can all agree on, and that's good enough. So my answer to that is just like, we need to not build superintelligence. And if we build superintelligence, we're in such a different regime where we're just so screwed that it's in God's hand at that point.
But I guess there could be degrees of screwed. Does it matter which company builds superintelligence first, or is it mutually assured destruction regardless? It doesn't matter at all. China, US,
I
Anthropic, OpenAI, same animal. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I don't think it matters. Mostly because we have to think about this. This is not going to be like one AI that like one guy built. What's going to be is an ecosystem of billions, trillions of AIs, copied, mutated, modified, self-improving, all competing with each other. Like thinking of superintelligence like a monolithic entity is like, you know, we don't even know how to do that. Like we don't even have designs that could like do that. If you have systems, grown as the current systems are, they're not written, they're grown, they're like, or they're we don't understand how they work internally, and they have billions of copies of them running and potentially self-improving, so writing their own code, changing their own code. This is much more like runaway evolution than it is like a specific thing built by a specific person. It's more like once this loop is truly kicked off and humans are out of the loop, who knows what comes out of that? Like it's just unknowable. We and like it won't be good. That's the only thing we can know. And whether the Chinese or Microsoft or OpenAI kick off the loop, currently there's no reason. They're all using the same techniques. All their models have the same level of stupidity basically, or like insanity or evilness, like within error margins. And so I don't see why it would make a difference.
Nick Bostrom talked about singleton. The first superintelligence would prevent ours from coming into existence. That kind of goes against your idea of billion of competing superintelligences. Do you think he's wrong?
I think the singleton will be made of superintelligences, but it will be much weirder than that. I think it will, in some sense, likely converge to some kind of system, the same way that cells converge to a body. But first of all, the transition there can be arbitrarily long and arbitrarily messy. Like it's just impossible to predict. We just don't have theory that can predict these things. Like we just don't know. Like evolution still, like even just like normal biological evolution, animals still constantly confuses us. Like we're still constantly surprised. There's constantly new papers about like our theory of biology was wrong, and like it turns out evolution did something crazy that we would have never predicted. Like we just don't actually have complete theories or understanding here. And even then, I expect if there was a singleton, it wouldn't be like, a nice binary file on a single computer. It would be a massive distributed network of like extremely complex blobs of like, unknowable things doing unknowable things. Like even if we had an ASI turned off on a hard drive and we could look at it, we would have no idea what we're looking at.
So, what is the main constraint right now on success? Is it talent? Is it funding? If I give you not I, but someone else gave you $1 trillion towards your goals, how would you spend it?
Funding is truly one of the biggest constraints right now. Politics is expensive. There's a lot of, to give you a bit of a feeling, um, a medium to large scale political campaign in the United States can easily run you at least $500 million. So, for example, the pro marijuana legalization campaign had a budget of about $650 million. And a typical presidential campaign is about 1.1 to 1.2 billion dollars. So this is what it would mean to have like one shot, one serious iteration of a political campaign in the United States. This is the average budget. I think it can be done with less, but like it's actually really uphill battle in terms of like, staff, advertising, just like a lot of things you need to do. Um, there are, 500 something members of Congress here in the United States. Um, I've talked to maybe 10 of them personally, and almost every single one had not heard about this issue even once. Just, maybe they've heard the word once somewhere, but no one has sat them down and explained it to them for 30 minutes. And often when I sit them down, like 80+% of the time, if I sit them down for 30 minutes and just explain the issue, they get it immediately. They're just like, oh, wow, yeah, that's really bad. What do we do? It's not that hard to explain. It's not that hard to persuade people, even. If you just tell people, like, oh, they're building things that might be smarter than humans and they don't know how to control them. And then how do you feel about that? And the answer is universally bad. People feel really bad about that. That seems, really dangerous and really bad. And so, but if you want to brief all 500 of those members, say within a year or something, that's a lot of work. Getting those things scheduled, getting FaceTime with them, and having people to deliver the meetings, that alone is like, takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of effort. It's not glamorous. In the advertising industry, generally the way one of the rules of thumb is if you want someone to internalize a message or to remember a message, they have to hear the message 7 to 10 times over the course of like 6 to 12 months. I think this is a pretty good goal. How expensive or how hard would it be to get, say, every citizen of the United States, or top 50% or top 10%, whatever, right, to hear this message 7 to 10 times over the next 12 months? And the answer is, we've done some of the math, and it's like, yeah, probably around 500 million is probably what this costs. And we have some change to spare to do it, like a smaller version, probably all G20 countries, with that amount of money. I think currently, we wrote a post recently. I think if we have $50 million, that's the smallest possible amount of money where I think we have a chance. Where I think we could run a large enough media campaign, we could, get enough stuff done that we have maybe a 10% chance of getting this work to work. I think if we have 500 million, we'd have a 40% chance of pulling it off. Both of these are, obviously just my feelings. There's not like you can objectively measure anything like this. This is just, our back of the envelope calculations of like, how many times could you get various people to see things for a given amount of ad budget and a given amount of management? How many people would you need to perform various tasks like these? We at ControlAI have spent years now building a playbook that scales. This is something that the community and like the general project have been lacking for a long time, is that a lot of the things that have been done historically are very bespoke. Like Eliezer wrote a book, and it was a great book, right? And I'm glad he did it, but only Eliezer could have done that. And we can't give him 10 times more money to write 10 times more books. That's not kind of how these things work. It's not scalable. But what we have done is we've built something that's very scalable. You can give us 10 times the amount of money and we'll do 10 times as many things. It's very easy for us to teach new employees. It's very easy to find new employees that are good enough to do this. We don't need super geniuses. We just need like good, conscientious people who want to do good and, have the courage to actually, do the playbook. And then I think we can get there. It's very hard. And a lot of it depends on time frames. If we had like 10 years, I'm really quite confident we can do this. Like, I'm really quite confident. If we have 2 years, yeah, it's going to be real tricky, and we're going to need the 500 million for that.
How much do you have right now? Who's funding ControlAI?
We're funded by philanthropic donors, Jan Tallinn and that type of person, and we don't disclose the exact numbers, but it's like a lot less than 50 million.
Have you considered running for office instead of persuading others?
I have definitely briefly thought about it, and I think it's not very feasible in the sense that it's very slow, it's very expensive, it requires a bunch of the similar work that we do now, and it's like lower leverage in many ways. I think if I had 10 or 20 years, maybe, but there's a big premium on speed right now, and so talking directly to people at scale and helping politicians that currently exist. Like, the other thing politicians love if you solve a problem and they can take the credit. And we're happy to do that. We're very, very happy for us to solve all the problems and they can take all the credit for it. But that's no problem for us whatsoever. So there's a lot of leverage in this. Where we don't have to polarize a thing. We can just we can provide solutions, bipartisan, Democrat, Republican, we can solve the problem. We can tell you exactly what to do. We can help you do it. We can run polling. We can do all these kinds of stuff. And we're happy if the politicians take the credit for it. That's not a problem for us at all.
On the kind of opposition side, accelerationist side, who is intellectually worth debating? Who is making actually good arguments, not just propaganda? If anyone.
Who is the best pro-tobacco lobbyist?
I
Is
was
kind
actually
of
told by someone who that is, and they hired them to do promotions for AI safety. So there is
well,
an answer to that question. I don't know what the name is.
there you go. Maybe you should go talk to him because I guess that's as good as it's going to get. I mean, fundamentally, it is just a fight. It is just actually politics at this point. Where um, you know, I'm sure there's some academic philosophers that are saying some bullshit about well, actually, it's morally required for us to do it because it's okay to take a 90% risk of everyone dying because there's a 10% chance of simulated souls or some shit. I've heard this stuff from people before, especially the extended post-Trump cluster. But to me, this is not it's like a Mickey Mouse argument, it's like a Marvel Comics argument, something that Thanos would say, some kind of evil alien would say in a sci-fi movie. This is not a real argument that normal humans would take seriously. So I expect if you want most of this is just being pushed cynically. We just got to be real here. There's just a thing where just there are just cynical forces in the world. Whether they're evil or not, we can argue, but they are cynical. Fundamentally, they just want power. They're just they're the guy with the chemical factory, and they want to pollute their waters, and they'll say whatever to get you to keep doing that. I think it's much more valuable would be to have debates and conversations with people outside of tech, people who are not financially incentivized. I think academics from other fields, politicians, union leaders, civil rights groups, stuff like this. I think, and that are potentially skeptical about AI for various reasons. I think this is much more productive. I think there's a lot of very productive conversation and dialogue to be had there in groups outside of this. But I think just the core tech cluster, the core AI cluster is just so extremely captured by financial interests that it's very, very hard to have any kind of serious intellectual discussion here. I'm sure there are some nice people in this field, right? I'm sure they exist and that are more unbiased. I don't know them, but I'm sure they exist. I don't really know them, but I do know that outside of the core Andreessen, accelerationist camp, outside of that camp, there are many very reasonable, nice people who may have some skepticism or uncertainty around, say, X risk and so on, with whom you can definitely have very productive conversations.
So I want to end on a more lighter set of questions. You brought up Nick Bostrom's kind of intellectual cluster. Do you have any feelings about simulation hypothesis?
It's unfalsifiable. It's not really a hypothesis. It's the kind of thing where if you're in a perfect simulation, by definition, you couldn't know, therefore it's equivalent. The two universes are indistinguishable, so it's kind of unscientific to distinguish them.
Is it 50-50 you in a simulation then?
It's undefined. There are three truth values for every statement: true, false, or undefined. And this is undefined.
Fair enough. Last time we met at MIT, I think, you had long, handsome hair. I suggested that maybe you should cut them off to be taken more seriously by politicians. Is this what I'm looking at? Is this what's happening? Was that right?
definitely a part of it. I mean, but honestly, that hair had to go. It was such a pain in the ass. It's long overdue. It was cool. When you're younger and you're like a weird tech guy, but like, oh man, it was such a pain. It took 2 hours for it to dry every day. Just like such a no, no, no. I'm so glad that that's gone. So yeah, that's partly that, but partly it's also like not worth the effort.
I hear you. I got a little bit going there, and it's definitely overhead. Final question. You have to come up with a clickbait title for this episode.
What would be a good one? This is the only way to stop AI. How about
Of
that?
course, Google algorithm wants it to be about 3 words long to fit it into the tiny preview thumbnail. So, John Connor speaks, or what do we have there?
3 words. Let me think. Can I do better on 3 words? I don't want to say anything too negative, but so maybe it's something like "It's not over."
I love it. Thank you so much, Connor. I wish
All right.
you tremendous luck. I hope to visit you in DC and
Yeah.
see all the accomplishments, hang out with all the senators.
Yeah. Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for all the work you've done over the years here as well. And yeah, good luck to all of us.